Dan Keller knew that better than anyone. Silence wasn't an absence of sound. It was a presence, a weight. In the right place, at the right time. It could press down until your sanity fractured like ice under a boot. He'd spent 30 years running from that particular silence, burying it under the precise logical symphony of steel stress coefficients and fire suppression schematics. He had built a life out of order to keep the chaos at bay. The life he'd built came crashing down with a corrupted video file and the buzzing of a satellite phone. He watched the clip for the 10th time, his knuckles white on the edge of his oak desk. The video, pixelated and glitching, showed the face of his sister, Chloe. Her eyes, usually so full of defiant manufactured bravado for her million-subscriber channel, were wide with genuine primal terror. Behind her, the iconic hexagonal carpet of the Overlook Hotel's second-floor hallway stretched into distorted infinity. "It's not just a story, Danny," she babbled, her voice a thin wire of panic. "It knows things. It's getting inside." Her cameraman, a burly guy named Marcus, suddenly screamed and lunged at the sound tech, his face a mask of homicidal rage. The camera fell, tumbling across that cursed pattern. Chloe shrieked. A shadow, formless and vast, blotted out the light. Danny! Her scream was cut short, replaced by a wet, dragging sound before the video dissolved into static. The satellite phone rang again. Dan answered, his voice flat. "Finch, Daniel," came the smooth, cultured voice of Alistair Finch. It was a voice that sounded like old money and older secrets. "I trust you've reviewed the footage. An extraordinary development. The psychic output is off the charts." "You sent her in there," Dan growled, the sound raw. I told her. That place isn't a game. It's the grandest game of all, my boy," Finch said, his tone utterly devoid of concern. Chloe understood the risks. She craved this. And now, she's at the epicenter of a once-in-a-century paranormal event. "I'm simply a patron of the arts." Dan's past was a minefield he navigated daily. When he was 8 years old, his father, a good man with a quiet desperation, had taken the winter caretaker job at the Overlook. Dan remembered the sprawling, empty halls, the oppressive silence, and the whispers that weren't whispers. He remembered his father changing, his eyes growing distant, his temper fraying until it snapped. He remembered his mother dragging him through a blizzard, the hotel's psychic rage screaming at their backs, while his father stayed behind to become another one of its stories. The experience hadn't broken him like it did his father, or like it did Jack Torrance years later. It had forged something in him. A sensitivity he called his intuition, but which he knew was a sliver of what the hotel's other special guests called the shine. It wasn't a megaphone like Danny Torrance's. It was a shield. A psychic resilience that let him feel the hotel's wrongness without letting it in. It was the reason he had nightmares of patterned carpets, and the reason he became a structural engineer, a man who understood how things break, and how to reinforce them. "I'm going in," Dan said, the words tasting like ash. "Excellent," Finch purred. "I had a helicopter prepped for you at the Boulder Municipal Airfield. There's a pack with everything you might need. Consider it a rescue mission, Daniel. And do try to keep your personal comm line open. The data we're gathering is priceless." Finch didn't want a rescue. He wanted a catalyst. Dan knew it. By sending in someone with a pre-existing traumatic connection to the place, Finch was pouring gasoline on a bonfire, hoping to film the inferno. He was using Chloe as bait, and now he was using Dan as the trigger. Hanging up, Dan looked at the photo on his desk. He and a teenaged Chloe, grinning. She had never understood his fear, interpreting it as an overprotective streak. Her vlogging career was a direct rebellion against the unspoken horror that had defined their family. She chased ghosts because she didn't believe in them. Not really. He did. He was going back to the place that had birthed them. The helicopter ride was a gut-churning ascent into a sea of white. The Rockies in late November were already a frozen hell, and the Overlook sat on its throne of rock like a skeletal king. From the air, it looked smaller, a forgotten toy in a vast, indifferent wilderness. But as the chopper circled, dropping him and his gear pack near the snow-clogged driveway, the hotel seemed to grow, reasserting its dominance. It was a predator, dormant but not dead. The grand facade was a ruin. Windows were boarded or broken, jagged teeth in a rotting grin. The paint was peeled, the wood warped. The silence was back, pressing in on him, heavy with the weight of decades of accumulated malice. His intuition flared a low hum at the base of his skull, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature. The hotel was aware of him. It was waiting. It remembered. The front doors were chained, but Dan, using a bolt cutter from the pack Finch had so thoughtfully provided, snapped the links. They groaned open, revealing a lobby draped in the shrouds of dust and decay. Moonlight, filtered through grime-caked windows, illuminated the cavernous space. The great fireplace was a black maw. The Native American tapestries on the walls were faded. Their vibrant colors bled into muted browns and grays. He switched on his headlamp, the beam cutting a sharp cone through the gloom. Everything was still. Too still. He could feel the hotel's consciousness coiling around him, testing his defenses. It whispered in the periphery of his hearing, not with words, but with feelings. The phantom chill of a freezer door left open, the bod scent of gin and regret, the faint, cloying sweetness of decaying flowers. He checked his own comm unit, a small earpiece linked to the sat phone. "Finch, I'm in. Any sign of her on your cameras?" Finch's voice was crisp, electrified with academic excitement. "Ah, Daniel. Welcome back. I have thermal hits all over the building, but they're intermittent, unreliable, like ghosts in the machine. Your sister's transponder signal is strongest on the second floor, west wing. But I must advise you, the energy readings around room 237 are volatile. Stay off the line unless I call you," Dan snapped, clicking off the channel. Finch was a vulture, and Dan wouldn't let him narrate the dissection. He made his way towards the grand staircase, his boots crunching on fallen plaster. The air grew colder. At the top of the stairs, he paused. To his left was the west wing. To his right, the east, and the grand entrance to the Colorado Lounge, and, beyond it, the Gold Room. A faint, impossible sound drifted from that direction, the gentle clinking of ice in a glass. Against his better judgment, he was drawn toward it. Every instinct screamed at him to find Chloe, but a deeper, more insidious curiosity pulled him toward the source of the sound. The Gold Room was vast and sepulchral. Tables and chairs were draped in white cloths like corpses. But the bar was immaculate. The mirrored backdrop gleamed, the bottles behind it full and dust-free. And behind the bar stood a man in a crisp red jacket, polishing a glass. "Good evening, sir," the bartender said, his smile calm and professional. He had a placid, ageless face. A bit of a slow night. Dan's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew this face from his father's stories, from the hotel's own lingering psychic residue. Lloyd's smile didn't flicker. "At your service. A drink, perhaps? To warm the bones. On the house." Dan's hand instinctively went to the small, solid steel flashlight in his belt. A grounding object. He focused on its cold, machined weight. "I'm not thirsty." "A pity," Lloyd said, setting the glass down. "A man in your position could use a clear head. Or perhaps a different perspective." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The management can be fickle. It sets traps for the unwary, but it rewards diligence. "Where is my sister?" Dan demanded. Lloyd gestured vaguely with his cloth. "The Queen is in her chambers, of course. But the path to royalty is guarded by jesters and madmen. Your little sister made quite a scene, roused the rabble. They don't care for loud noises." He paused, his gaze unnervingly direct. "You, however, you have a quiet about you. The manager appreciates that. He's been waiting for someone with the right temperament." The words slid into Dan's mind, oily and persuasive. This wasn't just a ghost. It was a mouthpiece, an agent of the hotel's will. "What traps?" Dan asked, playing along. "Every room has a story. Every hallway holds a grudge," Lloyd said cryptically. She went looking for the most famous story of all, room 237, a foolish errand. "You'll find what's left of her friends there. But the Queen herself, she was moved to a place of honor, the presidential suite." The information felt real. It was a lure, but a useful one. "Why are you helping me?" Lloyd's smile was a masterpiece of benign menace. "Because the hotel needs a new caretaker, Mr. Keller, and it is always interviewing. Now, I really must insist you go. The party is about to begin, and you wouldn't want to be underdressed." Dan backed away, his eyes locked on the bartender. He turned and walked, not ran, out of the gold room. The moment he crossed the threshold, he glanced back. The bar was gone. There was only a ruin of rotting wood and shattered mirrors, thick with cobwebs and the dust of ages. The second floor was worse. The silence here was different, a listening silence. The iconic carpet seemed to writhe in his peripheral vision, its geometric patterns a map of madness. Dan forced his eyes forward, focusing on the room numbers. 231, 233. He could feel a cold spot developing ahead, a psychic dead zone that drank the warmth from the air. He stopped outside room 237. The door was slightly ajar. A low, whimpering sound came from within. His fire marshal training kicked in: assess, analyze, act. He pushed the door open. The room was a mess. Camera equipment smashed against the far wall. Marcus, the big cameraman, was slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, a trickle of blood from his ear. The sound tech was nowhere to be seen. The whimpering came from the bathroom. Dan drew the heavy-duty maglite from his belt, its weight a comforting reality. He pushed the bathroom door open. The famous green-tiled room was pristine, unnaturally clean. In the tub, a woman lay with her back to him, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Ma'am?" Dan said, his voice cautious. "I'm here to help." The sobbing stopped. She rose slowly, gracefully, water sluicing from a body that was still beautiful, still alluring. She turned. Her face was a bloated, purpled mask of decay, her eyes milky white, her skin sloughing off the bone in wet chunks. A gurgle escaped her peeling lips as she held out her arms, a miasma of grave rot and swamp water rolling off her in a suffocating wave. The hotel wasn't just showing him a ghost. It was pushing the feeling of it at him, the despair, the loneliness, the endless, waterlogged decay. It was an attempt to drown his mind. Dan recoiled, but he didn't scream. He focused on the schematics of the building he'd memorized as a boy. Load-bearing walls, copper pipes, asbestos insulation. He anchored himself, in fact, in logic, in the physical reality of the structure, and the psychic assault slid off his mental shield, weakening. He backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. The psychic pressure vanished, but the stench lingered. He had his proof. Lloyd had told the truth. He continued down the hall, his senses on high alert. As he passed the elevators, a low groaning began. He turned to see the doors shuddering open. A wave of thick, dark liquid, smelling of rust and death, spilled out onto the carpet. It wasn't just a vision. It was tangible, lapping at the tips of his boots. He backed away as the blood tide surged, a crimson river flowing down the corridor. From the far end of the hall, two figures appeared. Little girls in matching blue dresses, their hands clasped. "Hello, Danny," they said in unison, their voices flat and hollow. "Come and play with us. Daddy's been waiting so long to play." They were using his name, twisting his own trauma, conflating it with the Torrance tragedy. The hotel was learning him, finding his weaknesses. He turned and ran, not from the girls but from the blood, splashing through the gruesome tide as it rose around his ankles. He had to get to the presidential suite. He found it at the end of the east wing. The double doors were ornately carved. He pushed them open and stepped inside. The suite was impossibly vast, a ballroom masquerading as a hotel room, and it was full. A ghostly party, a tableau from the 1920 seconds was in full swing. Men in tuxedos and women in flapper dresses danced to a phantom orchestra, their laughter like the rustling of dry leaves. They moved through and around him, their forms cold and insubstantial. And on a dais at the far end of the room, in a high-backed chair, sat Chloe. She was pale and still, her eyes fixed on the spectral dancers, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She was trapped, a fly in amber, her psychic energy feeding the phantasmagoria around her. "Chloe!" Dan shouted, running towards her. The dancers turned as one, their faces twisting from mirth to malevolence, their eyes burning with cold fire. "He's not one of us," a woman hissed. "A party crasher," a man with a slicked-back hair snarled, raising a champagne flute that was suddenly a broken, jagged weapon. Before they could converge, a calm voice cut through the din. "That will be quite enough." Lloyd was there, standing beside Chloe's chair, looking as dapper and unruffled as he had in the gold room. The ghosts subsided, turning back to their silent dance. "Impressive, Mr. Keller," Lloyd said with an approving nod. "Your resilience is remarkable. You see now, she is not your sister anymore. She is part of the collection, an ornament, but it doesn't have to be this way. Let her go," Dan said, his voice low and dangerous. "I can't, but you can," Lloyd countered smoothly. "The hotel is dying for a competent manager, a man of substance, a man who understands the building. It has chosen you, Mr. Keller. It's a lifetime appointment, all the comforts you could imagine. And your sister, she can stay with you, right here. The party never has to end. Just take your place, accept the position." This was the hotel's endgame. It didn't want to just kill him, it wanted to own him. To corrupt his strength and make him its anchor, its warden, its heart. His earpiece crackled to life. "My God, Daniel," Finch whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "The energy spike. It's a confluence, a nexus. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." In that moment, Dan's rage coalesced into pure, cold clarity. He was a pawn for two different monsters, one of brick and mortar, the other of flesh and blood, and he was done playing their game. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't a psychic warrior. He was an engineer. He couldn't fight the hotel's soul, but he could break its body. "You want a caretaker?" Dan said, looking Lloyd dead in the eye. "Fine, I need to inspect the furnace." Lloyd's smile widened. He thought he'd won. Of course. The heart of the Dord. House. Right this way. He gestured, and a door that hadn't been there a moment before shimmered into existence. It led to a steep, iron staircase, descending into darkness. Dan grabbed Chloe's arm. She was limp, unresponsive. He hauled her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and started down the steps into the hotel's grumbling, burning heart. The boiler room was a vision of industrial hell. The great ancient boiler squatted in the center of the room, a beast of iron and rust, its pipes snaking across the ceiling like veins. The air was thick with the smell of coal dust and hot metal. The rhythmic, percussive ka-thump of the machinery was the hotel's monstrous heartbeat. Dan laid Chloe gently in a relatively clear corner, away from the leaking pipes and piles of refuse. Her eyes were still unfocused, lost in the hotel's dream. "She'll awaken once you've accepted," Lloyd said, appearing beside the pressure gauges. He was no longer alone. Standing next to him was the spectral form of Delbert Grady, the former caretaker, his face a grim mask of duty.
"You've been a very naughty boy,"
Grady intoned, his voice a sepulchral whisper. "This is it, Dan," came Finch's voice in his ear, frantic with glee. "The core! The readings are off the scale! This will rewrite every book on the subject!" Dan ignored them all. He moved toward the boiler, his eyes scanning the controls, the valves, the relief pipes. It was an antique, a museum piece, a relic held together by rust and sheer malevolent will. And he knew its secrets. He knew exactly how to kill it. "The choice, Mr. Keller," Lloyd pressed, his voice losing its placid edge. "Join us. Or join the ghosts." The hotel unleashed its final assault. The boiler room walls seemed to melt away, replaced by the hotel's greatest hits. The blood tide surged down the iron staircase. The Grady twins appeared at the top, beckoning with pale, small hands. The woman from 237 materialized from a cloud of steam, her rotten arms reaching. And through it all, a vision of his own father, his face twisted in rage, wielding a roque mallet. "Stay with us, son. It's your duty," his father's ghost screamed. Dan shut his eyes, blocking it all out. He held onto the one solid thing: his knowledge. Pressure builds. Metal fatigues. Safety valves fail. He was a fire marshal again, assessing a catastrophic risk. He lunged for the main pressure release valve, a large red wheel. Grady's ghost flew at him, its fingers passing through him with a deathly chill. But Dan didn't falter. He put his shoulder into the wheel and turned. It was stiff with age, but with a groan of protesting metal, it began to move. A piercing whistle screamed through the room as steam vented, but it wasn't enough. He saw the override controls for the coal feeder, a simple lever system. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby wall and slammed it against the lever's housing, shattering the lock. He yanked the lever down, forcing the automated system to dump more and more coal into the furnace. "What are you doing?" Lloyd shrieked, his dapper composure finally breaking. "You'll destroy us. You'll destroy this magnificent place." The ka-thump of the boiler quickened, becoming a frantic, hammering pulse. The pressure needle climbed into the red. A deep, groaning vibration started, shaking the entire room. Pipes began to burst, spraying superheated steam. "Dan, the structural integrity is failing!" Finch yelled in his ear. "Get out of there! I need you to get out!" "Go to hell!" Dan snarled, smashing the glass on the pressure gauge with his wrench. He grabbed Chloe, hauling her back to her feet. Her eyes were beginning to clear, the psychic hold weakening as the hotel's physical form began to die. "Danny, what's happening?" she mumbled, her voice hoarse. "I'm getting us out," he said, pulling her towards the stairs. The escape was a nightmare ascent through a collapsing reality. The ghosts, no longer controlled, raged around them, a maelstrom of disjointed psychic energy. Hallways twisted and stretched into impossible lengths. The floor bucked like the deck of a sinking ship. They scrambled up the main staircase as the blood wave receded, leaving behind a foul ectoplasmic sludge. They burst out the front doors into the blinding snow of the blizzard. The world outside was no longer safe. The hedge animals, the great topiary lions and rabbits, were moving, their leafy forms caked with snow, slid through the drifts, their silhouettes monstrous against the pre-dawn gloom. A lion, its maw gaping, lunged for them. Dan shoved Chloe aside and pulled a flare from his pack, striking it. The brilliant, chemical magnesium light flared to life, and the shadow creature recoiled with a silent, vegetative scream. They scrambled, fell, and crawled away from the dying hotel, the roaring of the overloaded boiler growing louder and louder behind them. They were 100 yards away when it happened. First came a low, earth-shattering crump. Then, the Overlook Hotel erupted. Windows blew out in a shower of glass and fire. The roof was thrown into the air, and the entire structure swelled outwards before collapsing in on itself in a titanic fireball that turned the night to day. A wave of force, both physical and psychic, washed over them, a final, silent scream of 1,000,000 trapped souls being released at once. Dan shielded Chloe with his body as the shockwave hit, and then there was silence. A real silence. Clean, empty, and absolute. The malevolent weight that had pressed on him his entire life was gone. They lay in the snow, shivering, battered, as the first true rays of dawn crested the mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. In the distance, the steady, rhythmic whump-whump-whump of a rescue helicopter grew louder. Chloe stirred, her eyes clear for the first time. She looked at the pillars of smoke rising from the mountain peak where the hotel had been. Then she looked at him, her brother, the man who had walked back into hell for her. "It's over?" she whispered. Dan nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over." They were found huddled together at sunrise, traumatized and frostbitten but alive. And for the first time since they were children, they were finally, truly free. The mountain was clean.